on that front, so it doesn't remain a mystery. Minimally, sometime in April, not minimally, at the start of April, we will be in another location that is not here, just so everyone can prepare for that. So all are aware, classes will be hosted elsewhere in April due to needs of this space. That venue is what is getting decided upon. Depending on how that works out, we'll either have both classes in the same place in different rooms, or both classes will be in entirely two different locations within the Kansas City area. Depends on whether or not we can get the desired location. And if you happen to have open space that can hold 2 rooms of 40 people comfortably with a projector and microphone, that would be an allowed suggestion as well. Put that in a little suggestion box. That is the feedback form. Ooh, maybe that's what I should have called it. Oh. Oh, see, I turned the mic down because I thought it was too loud. Is that mic turnout desired for here or on the audio video deal? Is that better? So it's not a little, as long as it doesn't echo, I suppose. That's pretty echoey. All right, that's it for everyone. I'm gonna have to change that because that's. We want to mention that we have an assignment that was due Thursday and today. If I know how to read, we start on an assignment today after class is done towards the end. Just want you to be aware of it. It's finally up there. Got added up there this morning.
I just tried to click it and said I was unauthorized.
Yeah.
Aww. It works when I click it. I will let Chris know. It's really weird that I can see it though, because I don't think I have any special permissions. But I'll message Chris about that now. We should get started with our starter questions. I'm definitely trying that now. Maybe I'm just a little loud here. I'll stop on that. Starter question time.
You can't put parameters in there. You can't find different constructors in that class. What is it like? What's a class? What is a field? Let's say what's a class field? been appealed from. There's also methods on that applicant's an expert. Was a property. Right, it's methods. There's and settings, right? There's and settings for getting the value, setting the value. You can do more than just setting the value. You can validate the information. And you can set different levels of access for each of those. So you can be interpublic with some local, some level of access. Certain classes can set the value. What is the convention? What is the convention for differentiating? Yeah, the lowercase, so you have the same name. In the case of the student, you have the main field, which is all lowercase. The main property is uppercase. Okay. That's what the convention will help differentiate a little bit more. So should pop up and you can see this dot or this dot. So this is a dot, capital letter. So very close to capital letter. We'll let this actually property. Expect there's a set. It was a class metric. Yeah, function behavior is defined on the class definitions. So that access to the
Just a little bit longer.
the object. Public private. I might.
My bad.
Right now, probably only I think the material says that might be
Do any groups need more time? Okie dokie. Feel free to post your questions in the Slack channel, remembering to tag me so that I hear the noise to check. And if I don't respond within about 3 minutes, or at least address that I've seen the question verbally from the stage, that means I've forgotten about it and you should remind me again. So I updated the class. The link now works for the assignment. We'll talk about the assignment later, but the link works now. I forgot to click publish. Normally, Chris takes care of that for me, and he did not. But now it's there and published. I also believe I'm not muted. Yes. All right, flow for tonight's class. I'm gonna go over the studio from last time, which is the cheese NBC. Adding the remove of the cheese. After that, I will go over some examples about classes and the various ways you can get data in and out of them through an example, through 2 examples, with a basic example of classes. The other one will be heavily related to the prep work with a school and courses and working through those. And then we'll start the studio. So for now, we will begin working with the remove the cheese studio. So the goal for tonight was to go over removing the cheese. Studio, which I realized I put my notes in the wrong spot on my computer. Sorry about that. They got changed, that's why. I am happy I worked forward through Thursday because the classes were changed. All right. I know what I'm doing now. We are covering the cheese with the removal, and I have the correct notes to cover them. First thing that I'm going to do, so the code that we have is exactly where we left off on Thursday. With our controller that has an index, it shows all of our cheeses. We can add cheeses. The adding there, that's just showing the form when you want to add a new cheese. And then we have the route that goes and adds the cheeses to the static dictionary that is on our class. Now, through what we've covered with the classes and the prep work, we have a bit of a better understanding here. I'm going to move this forward. I almost fell off twice, so there's a big space back here. Static attributes on classes allow you to be able to have all instances of the class access the same information. So if we go here, go to our cheese NBC updated, We do the .NET run. Let's see. Yay. From here, we go to our cheese page. We have my cheese, we have add, and we go to add a cheese. It's yellow. We add it, and it shows. Apparently, I updated it to have an arrow. I think that's a whitish cheese. So the way that this works, and the reason that you can see these different cheeses is because we're using that static variable, which is shared between all the instances of the cheese controller. And since it's shared across all the instances, is why you can access it. When I say instance, that means each time a new cheese controller is made. And every time you make a request to this /cheese URL, internally, the .NET MVC goes and makes a brand new cheese controller instance. That's why you need a static variable if you're going to store the information on the controller. Which is note, normally this is not how you would store and retrieve information. It's what we're doing right now until we start to cover data. So before we get into a solution, I wanted to remind everyone what we had when we started. What we're going to add to here is basically a button that lets you remove each one. This mentions using a checkbox, and then you can submit the checkbox with a form. I'm going to change that in order to show you all a little bit more about the framework that is here. That's what I wanted to do on Thursday, but we ran out of time. So the framework that we're using, so it's called Bootstrap. So if you just Google Twitter Bootstrap, that is the framework that we're using. And the way that this is laid out, so the first time you come to this website, it may be sort of a lot to take in. It may be a lot to take in, and it may be somewhat confusing where everything is located. In general, the getting started, that's where you would go to download it. There's not really a lot you necessarily need to see on the getting started. That just sort of tells you what Twitter Bootstrap's all about. In general, you'll likely want the CSS, components, and or JavaScript section. And to have a good idea of what you have in each section, click on CSS over here on the far right, well, over there on the far right. Initially, for the bulk of everything we're going to be doing, we'll mostly just need the CSS tab. And that's what we'll use for the bulk of all the pieces that I want to show you, sort of different parts, so that if you go to use Twitter Bootstrap, you can be a little bit more familiar with it than what you're just sort of seeing for the first time. Just to note, it sort of says it when you go into each one. Components are helpful little pieces you can use all around the site. The main thing that the components will do for you is you don't have to write any JavaScript to use them. And that's how a lot of the components will work. You'll end up doing some kind of markup that it recommends. So for instance, down here for navigation, it'll talk about how you can have the markup,
that would then produce something that looks like this tabbed navigation, like little envelopes. Gives you examples of the tabs you can do, mentions how you can have it be, or often referred to as pills. So if you're looking for something that's more than just like a button or a paragraph or a form, it's likely in components or JavaScript. The CSS page usually just has individual elements. It doesn't have more of the complex, different pieces put together. If you ever get frustrated like I do, where you might be further down on the page, and you try to scroll up, and then it just keeps scrolling up, if you just always click the top link and then scroll, you'll get to the top of the page. For some reason, there's not a back to top button anywhere that I've been able to find. The JavaScript section, in general, you will likely ignore it, but what it has are a lot more interactive elements where the user will go and see more. So for example, this tooltip allows you to put different tooltips, something they call a popover. So popovers look a little bit different than a tooltip. They have a little bit more. Those require JavaScript to work. That's why they're in the JavaScript section. Whereas the other two pages can work without JavaScript. But what we'll be using here from these two pages is a combination of the buttons and an icon from the other page. And that's to show a little button that says remove and has a trash can next to it to be able to remove it. So with that in mind, we'll need to go and first update our template. So if we go to views, cheese, and index, we show each one of our cheeses. And what we want to show next to one of these cheeses is a form that will then allow us to remove the cheese. So we know initially we'll want a form of some kind. We won't worry about the action or the method yet. Well, we know what the method is going to be. The method is almost always post. When we're going to be mutating data, we know this form is going to be used to delete one of the cheeses. So we'll make a post to go and delete that cheese. And initially, we know we want a button. We'll give it a type of submit. We'll stop here just to go and see what it looks like. So we can see remove, shows it there. So if we want the button to look a little nicer, look like one of these buttons, or one of these other buttons down here, we'll go and make it look like a warning button. So if we see the warning button down here, there's a warning class, indicates this should be, caution should be taken with this action. When you are deleting something from a website, generally you want to be a little cautious about it. So we'll go with those warning classes. So that's where we do class. And this sort of building on itself is a common pattern in CSS. So the BT in there is short for button because web developers are lazy. We don't like typing things all the way out. And the other part of it is so that there's less of a payload coming from the browser. So there's less to download overall from a number of characters on the page. That's why sort of shorthand is used a lot.
in various CSS classes. So the space BTN class
Gives you your basic style for a button, and then the BTN warning adds the extra styles that give it the color, give it that warning color. So if we come over here, you can now see our nice little remove button. Says remove on it. We got colored white so that it was easier to read it on there. Sort of get that automatically with Bootstrap, which is pretty nice. Now if we come down here, there are these helper classes, which will color text for you, or other ones that will do background for you. And then there's this section of things that are called quick floats. What that means is it will force your elements to go a certain way on the page. So if this does what I want, see if this does what I want. That didn't. That looks terrible. Yeah, that's the class I wanted. Form inline, so that it smashes it all up in one line. So here inside the form, you can change it to form inline. So just see that markup again. This is mostly for styling, not actually necessary for the classes. Well, we're gonna let it be ugly for now. And the other piece I wanted to add in here is to use right here what's called these glyphicons. We're going to use this trash can one, which was often used when you're deleting something or throwing it away. And down below, why don't you scroll through all of the icons. It goes and gives an example of how to write it, how to write the markup to generate the icon. We'll go and create our icon inside of our button. It's valid to have a span tag inside of a button, except the icon that we wanted was the glyphicon, glyphicon-trash. So glyphicon-trash, then we come over here, update it, we got a nice little trash can. And we can click remove, and nothing happens. Now if we look at the network, it is posting it, but we haven't actually defined anything to happen for that post. Likely what we want to go and do is define an action we want to delete. Right now, if we were to submit this form, however, we're not actually submitting any information. So this is a lot of the times when you go to hit a button like one of these, if you notice you're not actually selecting anything at all, there will be a hidden input under there that actually has the data. So we're going to have a certain cheese that we go and delete, and the value will be the and the type of this is hidden. So refresh the page. Well, refresh it this way. So now if we open this up and go to the network and click remove, now we get a 404. But if we scroll down here, we can see that we've gone and actually submitted the data to the browser. So now we need to actually go and handle what happens when we try to delete a cheese. And feel free to jump in with any questions you may have. So much like the new cheese route, we will want to have a delete. I will do almost the exact same thing. So we'll have a delete, all this, delete cheese. We don't need a description. We'll redirect to cheese. We don't really want to add to the cheese, we want to remove. Like always, we'll want to be safe when we go to remove because we want to make sure it exists. We can do cheeses dot contains key. And the reason that we're calling it cheese here is because in the data that we're submitting, we've called it cheese in the form. So we have cheese here, we check to see if it exists, and then if it does, there you go. Oh. We don't even need to be safe. Check is unnecessary in C#. So if you didn't read that, it specifically says this method returns false if key is not found, which is totally fine. We don't actually care if it's not found. We just want to remove it from our list. So in order to see if this works, we'll go ahead, restart the server. And this is one of the reasons I really like working with views. So you can get all your view logic done without having to refresh. Make sure that's set up how you think it should be. And then you go and fiddle with the code that needs to be restarted and recompiled to test to see if it's working. So now we come over here. And we're all out of cheeses because we restarted the server. And that static class, each time you restart, is created brand new. So before we can remove any cheeses, we have to go and add some cheeses. This is an example of why it is nice. Well, it will be nice once we start having models, because the data will persist across restarting the server. Now, if this was done correctly, when we click remove here, it went, removed it, sent us back, and successfully removed. Are there any questions before we get started on the other content for the evening?
Can you scroll through the code slowly?
So the code here, we have cheeses, the index, which is what was there last time. The only thing we've actually added new, and the editor goes to show it here, is the delete route. and action handler. So we define the route using that route filter. And then the handler is defined on the class, our cheese controller. And then our index, we went and added a form here. That class form inline didn't do anything, and I don't really want to fiddle with it and waste everyone's time watching me try to get the CSS to work. But I wanted the trash can to be next to the word, not below it. But I don't want to mess around with it right now. Actually. It's the only change I'm going to make. There we go. Reason that worked is the form is a block level element, and what happens is it changes what's called the flow of your document. So by putting the inline tags inside of the form, that's why I was able to line up on one line with CSS. But that's as much as I'll cover for that CSS for now. Okie dokie, we'll move on then. If you're curious about that solution, it is now pushed out to GitHub. So next up, we will cover some example classes. Specifically, we're going to be using a student class. As you can see, you don't actually see it here. C# does some work for you to make it so you don't have to put everything in one file. And I'm going to continue to do that throughout the examples I show because it is a much better programming practice to have files only contain logic that is relevant to them, much like the encapsulation that was mentioned in those starter questions. A file should really only be doing work that it is concerned with. So in this case, main, all it is doing is making a student, giving it a name, and then saying hello to that student. If you were really excited and curious what that means, you can run it. And it says hello to me. This new is what's used to create an instance of an object, a class, in C#. That keyword is necessary anytime you're wanting to go and create an instance of a class. If you don't have a keyword, then it will complain, give you a method sort of error that's not necessarily the most discernible on what it means. So non-invocable member student cannot be used like a method. That's the other part of C#. You can't have functions like you could in Python. So in Python, we had a function keyword. We had a def keyword, sorry. In Python, we had a def keyword that would allow us to go and define a function we could just use anywhere we wanted. In C#, that is not allowed. We must have our functions defined on classes. So what that means here sort of as an example of sort of a pretty basic class using some encapsulation. And normally you wouldn't go and define all of it out quite like this because we're not doing anything special inside the what are called getters and setters of our name property on here. So we have a name property. It's what we go and set when we initially on our program here. Student.name, gave that student a name, then we just say hello to them. And the entirety of this class is contained in these 16 lines. On Thursday, I actually am adding a lot more to this class, and we'll do more with the course as well, and it will be changed a little bit. But for tonight, what we've done is we have gone and defined a, this should say private. So .NET run, we'll still go and run. Still says hello to me. The reason that works is we have a private variable name. Notice the lowercase n, which is different than our uppercase property name. So the uppercase name is what we allow other users or other programmers, developers to interact with when they want to set the name of a student when they go and create a student. Notice the capital N here to go and set that name. If I try to go and use the lowercase, it's already complaining. But red squiggly is already telling me something's wrong. And then whenever I actually run it, it explicitly states that student.name is inaccessible due to its protection level. That is an error that you will see a lot of the times if you go and try to access a member of a class that you don't have permission to access, no matter what level that is. And private is the most specific level you can give. That says only instances of this class may access this variable. And specifically, it's internal to the class. So even if I have an instance, as you saw there, I can't modify that internal variable. And the way that name goes and works here is get just returns what we have, and set goes and sets the value of name equal to whatever name has been assigned whenever you call it. So on line 10, we go and assign the name property, the value So it goes and sets that value. There is a question on how does the compiler know that my student class exists? And I've actually done something pretty terrible in what I've written here. So normally, when you go and write a program, and you have this namespace, example classes, and then you have class program, and then we have our main method on there, it works because here, the default of the way that .NET, so 1.1 is the version I'm currently using. If we go and look at one of the previous ones, the way that the configuration file works is it by default looks in the current directory for a class that has a main method, and it will go and run it. The reason that it can use my student class is because it exists in that same directory structure, and I've declared it in the global scope of the C# environment, which is a terrible practice. You would not actually do that. And I do it differently on Thursday. I just wanted to not have as much on the screen.
So normally you would use documentation, or you would put using at the top and import that other file?
So the question is, normally you would use using and import that other file. What would normally happen here, since this is sort of, if I were writing a school system, I would set it up the same way that I have namespace example classes. I would declare my class in the same namespace or a nested namespace. So if you've ever worked with any Java code, you will often see something like com.apache.java, and then it goes on for another 20 package names. That is often done so that you can easily pull them in or reference the various different packages. So what you would normally do here is put it inside the proper namespace. I've just made it public to all C# things that want to use it, that are compiled in the same location as this program.
So if it was in the same directory, but if it was under a different namespace, the compiler wouldn't include it?
I'm actually uncertain on that. So if it were in a different namespace, we can try that out. Call this a fun namespace. So it says 0 references, so that's a good sign that we've broken it. And then it says this does not exist. That is amazing. See, it even knew that the fun namespace is what we wanted. So it pulls it in automatically because we've declared the namespace within the same project. It's actually, so this is one of the reasons that Visual Studio, if you're using it on your machine, one of the things that you can do when you set up a project is you can import hundreds of directories. One of the reasons for that is so you can do this sort of combine different namespaces that you might be using across different of your own projects. So if you're building a bunch of applications internally and you have a utility sort of package that you've written to do interest calculations, which I almost wrote an example about, and I realized most people probably wouldn't be too excited about that, so I didn't. But that would be a time that you would use this sort of pull it into your project, and then when it builds, it's automatically there. Sorry. I keep clicking and it shows all the references. So are there any other questions on this example before we move on to the course and student together example? Has a bit more. I'll go to the school example. And that's what it does. So we'll go and print out a bunch of students that it randomly created. With a random ID. And clearly I have something random wrong here. But we'll go and say the count, number of the students, the class, each student inside that class. So if we go in the program, so to go over what happens here, the first thing that we do is we declare a list of students. If you notice, I'm using that var keyword. In C#, if you get tired of typing the type declarations of what you're doing, since you're just stating list of students, the var keyword goes and does the work at compilation time to get itself replaced with list of students. And whenever I had gone and attempted to go and write some C# for work, the default C# style guide made me change all of my code to use the var keyword whenever it was inline declarations like this. Which is why I'm showing it to you now so that you can see, as you would write C# on an inline declaration where you're actually assigning it, creating it, and assigning it on the same line, the var keyword is encouraged to be used because you can already tell what type the variable is, because you're declaring it right there. So we create some students, which are a list of students. We have our student class over here. And then we have a course, which I've not shown you anything about, but there's a course class. You can trust me, there's a course class in there. And then we go and get some names. That is a separate method that I went and made. We go through, we generate a GPA. That's why that's messed up. So number of credits, we just go and say that everyone has 15 credits. We go and add a student to the class. So all of our students, we go and add them on here. And then for each student, we go and print them out. The first set of printing that just said hello to each one. The next thing that we do is we go and set the name of our course. Note, while we were printing out those students, we went and added them to the course. So, because a course has students in it. And this will actually somewhat relate to the studio for tonight, which deals with sort of how you might structure classes that relate to each other and how you might decide to store data in a class. You can hate my class design, that's fine. We can make it better. So courses will have students in them. So we go and add them in there. We set the name. I wrote a line because I just wanted blank space in there. And then we go and we write our course. And then we print out the course. Without realizing it, I just learned that WriteLine goes and uses format strings. I didn't even realize I wrote that till right now.
You mean stringed out format?
Yep, stringed out format, apparently unnecessary for WriteLine. So all those times I was doing that, unnecessary. I don't remember doing that. That's why I'm so perplexed. C# business. So using the random class that's built in, you go and instantiate a random instance. Then I just sort of wrote up a bunch of random names. Then we choose some names randomly. If you notice, get names, because that is not necessarily related to a student. Ideally, I'd put this in a different generator file, move that over. But instead, I didn't. But because we're creating all the students inside of the main, that's why that's in here on this program class. That is sort of the default. So we go through here, we create a list of chosen names. There will always be 20 of them because of the I that is declared there. And then the chosen index right here, I do a random.next. will be from 0 to namechoices.count. And the name choices is the list that I declared up above. And finally, I add the chosen name, whichever one it may have been, and return it. Then to cover our student, you notice, I didn't do this in main for some reason, and this is why the names aren't very random. I've declared random to be a static private instance on the class, and that is because the way that random works in C# is it gets created and it uses the current time when it's made to then determine the next random to tell it to. And if you go and do what I have done in this program, where get names goes and generates a new random each time, you won't end up really getting something that appears random, because it'll happen so fast, it'll be happening at almost the exact same moment in time. So each time you call .next, it's using the same seed. That seed, so we talked about the seed in Python. In this case, it uses time. And it's going to say right now, but right now is essentially going to be the same moment for every student that gets created. So when you do .next, and that's why student ID here, oh yes, all code, just as a note, the question was, will this be available later? Yes, all the code that I write up here is always available on my GitHub, and I link to it from the class every time. So I have defined what is referred to as a constructor, because student ID is something that you would not actually allow anyone to assign ever, which is why student ID here is lowercase, and for some reason I just refuse to put the word private. So we go and we set it, do the .next to get whatever the next ID is, which in this case, we can see that we're getting random IDs. Previous to that, when I was just doing the random in the class, some of those IDs actually overlapped because computers aren't actually random. So we have our student ID that gets set in the constructor. We will cover more on constructors on Thursday in more detail. But the main part here is that we have a private student ID, the name, which is just like it was before, only I've now written that name property how you would usually write it if someone using your class is allowed to get and set it. You'd use the shorthand that just says get set. They're allowed to get and set that value. The reason that you do this, as the prep material mentioned, rather than just saying it's a public string name as an attribute that is just declared and they can set, by making it a getter and setter, it allows you to change the code later so that if you wanted to set requirements on name length or make it so they couldn't put vulgarities in as someone's name, or if you wanted to ensure really any other validation on name that you wanted, you could go and do that. Or if you wanted to do something similar to what I've done with student ID here, the set I've made private, which means no one other than the code of this class can set the student ID. So you could do that same thing with the name. And we'll cover more on sort of how that would be useful with the constructors. On Thursday, the main part is that the only spot in this code where the student ID is set is when you initially create a student. And then it's never set again. And further, because we've declared the setter on our student ID, notice the capital S, as private, it cannot be set. It cannot be assigned later. So a student masking arrayed around in your program, their ID cannot be changed with the way the code is currently written. Next thing that we have are number of credits. We allow students to go and get, set, update their credits. Same with their GPA. We'll do a little more with that on Thursday. And then we have a toString, and this is something I have not noted very much yet. We'll cover more on Thursday, what the override means. This is what allows it to print out the student as you see it down here. That override is what has the name, ID, hyphen, hyphen, and then GPA divided by number of credits. Then this generate GPA method, notice the public static double. That's why that's messed up. That's what I meant to use. If you notice right here, everyone's GPA was the exact same at 2 the first time we ran. And I was previously generating a new random every single time we generate a new GPA. That was being called right here in this for loop that goes over our names. Now the difference you'll notice with the update to using that static random, which does not get redeclared every time. So we'll go and rerun this. Oh, I did not mean that. I meant .NET run. I'm glad that didn't break anything. So now the printout here, you can actually see these GPAs are different. They actually have different values. And that is an artifact of the way that random works. So if that wasn't quite clear, my fumbling around with words earlier, you can see right there the difference was it wasn't actually random until we used a static instance of it, because that for loop is so fast. Generate GPA, all this does is randomly generate a number between 0 and 400, because normally GPA is a number from 0 to 4. I'm just going to do that. So 0 to 400 gives us a number that is 0 to 400. We divide by 100 to then get a 0 to 4 GPA value. You can pass format strings in C# the same way you could in Python to format them. Go out to the decimals that you want them to. So now that we know how the students work, we come over here to the course. So just a recap of what this program does. We have a list of students, we have a course, we go and generate a a list of students. Everyone has 15 credits. Then for each one of those students, we go and add them to the class, and then we go and print out the course. And when we print out a course, it looks like this course, cool class count. So now if we go and look at our course, a course has students in it. And this is an example of where I've gone and made another setter private. So you're free to go and get the students that are in a course, but you are not allowed to directly put a student in the course. You have to explicitly call this add student method. And the reason that that's done, you can sort of see that here. So if students is null, we then automatically go and create a list of students and assign it. And then we go and add a student. Oh, and I forgot, I added logic here that I can't actually be added to a class. So anyone whose name starts with a G, so we'll notice that I am one of the students that got printed out, but I was in fact not added to the class. So this is another sort of reason you would use getters and setters. In this particular case, the main reason that I made these set private was so that the consumer of a course does not have to worry about setting up the list of students. They can just keep adding students to the class. And the class internally automatically sets up the new list of students. And then goes and adds a student to the class. The name, much like the student name property, has a getter and setter. Number of students. Return students.count when you go to get it, because that's what it is. There's no need to do much else. So that's another example of where you can set a property and set the getter to do something a little bit different than what you might expect to implement. In this case, you want to know the number of students in a class, so you can return that as a property. That way, consumers of your class are not having to do course.students.count. They can just get the number of students. And some advantages to this is it allows you to change the implementation later if you go to add a concept of enrolled students or all students. You can add more variations of types of counts of students you could have in your course. And then finally, I wanted to show people the awesome use of the string builder class that I'd been ignoring. So people had questions about when you might want to use string builder or what you could use it for. This is an example of when string builder is helpful. Specifically, because I am looping over all the students, it's very inefficient to keep concatenating strings because they're immutable. So we go and allocate new memory on the device for every single one of those. Right here, when we use the string builder, we can go and use the append line, which will go and append a new line to that string that it's building. So the first thing we do is, and you can sort of see what happened here, set up our course. Then we have the name, then we have the count, then we have the students, and then finally, we go and show all the students that are in the class. This is another toString method that is automatically called whenever you go to print it out. Again, we'll cover a bit more of that on Thursday. Then the string builder class has this toString method, which is nice enough to go and convert all those lines you went and made on your string using the string builder to be what you see there, everyone in the course. And then finally, tonight's studio is the design of a restaurant menu. And the goal of the studio is to create a restaurant, you have a menu, and it has menu items. So you'll want to create the design. I would think of it much like you would a menu at a restaurant. You'll make a menu, it will have items on the menu. Any questions? You have about 30 seconds. So the assignment was, so the tech consoles, the console one, I believe, was due last week. Yeah, so last Thursday, Tech Jobs console was due. After the studio tonight, it is encouraged to get started on the Tech Jobs MVC, which is due on the 23rd, so 2 Thursdays from now. So now it is stand and switch time. I'll stand and deliver. Let's call it what's that one? Musical chairs. I like to just play a song. I'm not sure if everyone would appreciate